I want to welcome back to the program Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Congresswoman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam.
We got a bunch of stuff that we want to talk to you about, but let's start with student debt, because I know you're deeply involved in this. I think since the last time we spoke to you, well, it's certainly been since the last time we spoke to you. I'm sure you're aware, President Biden found it. I mean, I think the last time we spoke, we were asking where the memo was from the Department of Education. I don't even know what the stat. They found it, and it turns out he can do it, and he did it at least to some degree. $10,000 for everyone under making under $125,000 as an individual, $250 for a couple. $20,000 if you were the recipient of a Pell Grant. I have a sense, I know the answer to this question, but what do you think about that debt relief?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been a champion in trying to get complete student debt cancellation, but this is significant. 43 million of the 45 million who have student debt will feel some relief. 20 million of those will have their student debt wiped out. And so, the day that it was announced, I was getting text messages from people who in my district who have been part of that movement, who've been campaigning alongside me to try to get student debt cancellation in tears, because, the amount of debt that they had would ultimately be canceled by the time this is processed. So we are grateful that the president, one, did find the memo, that he did carry out the promise he made to me end of March when I met with him in the White House, that he will move some sort of student debt cancellation, and ultimately did keep his campaign promise.
Do you think that's the end of it? I mean, because I have to, or let me ask you a subsidiary question. Do you think they were surprised at how little pushback there was? I mean, it seemed like it was a story in the news for, 36 hours, 48 hours. Obviously, it helped him in the polls. I mean, I think there's like direct evidence of that, that his approval rating went up, particularly amongst young people. It's probably going to help the Democrats writ large in November. But in terms of pushback, it seemed to have gone away. Like, there was Ted Cruz went out there and said, why are we giving basket weavers, majors? And then they realized, like, oh, my God, it turns out there's 45 million basket weavers in this country. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Like, do you think they were, A, surprised by the lack of pushback? And B, do you have a sense that, like, there's going to be a sequel?
So I don't know if the White House itself was surprised. I think they've been clearly paying attention to the polls and knew that this was significantly going to be helpful to the president and to the Democrats in general going into this midterms. But I know that some of our colleagues in Congress who said, this would be the end of us, were surprised that there was a minimal pushback, and that the talking points that the Republicans had ultimately fell apart. Now, the only thing that they have left to say is that we've taken away their recruitment tool for recruiting for the military, which is the most ridiculously obvious.
I mean, it's probably true a little bit.
Yeah,
but that's not.
You're not supposed to say it. You shouldn't say that. Yeah, say
that out loud, and they're telling them themselves. And I think that response in itself is helpful to us, because what we are recognizing, I think, as Democrats collectively, including the president and the administration, is that when we do the right thing in helping working people in this country and the working poor, that those policies really do impact the election, get people on our side. And it is not okay for always to make promises to people and fall short on those promises. And this is, this has to usher in a new era of Democrats fulfilling the promises that they make on the campaign trail when they are given the opportunity to legislate.
I think we've had a conversation in the past, too, where we talked about there's some members of your fellow Democrats who are not always necessarily sincere about being supportive of something, et cetera, et cetera. you say that there are some of your colleagues who were surprised at the lack of pushback. How earnest was their fear of an electoral pushback? And to the extent that they were earnest about that fear, how much do you think that like this example showing them like, hey, this actually is helpful electorally? Like what percentage of those people out there could it actually move in Congress, as opposed to like, I'm saying I'm afraid of the electoral pushback because I really don't like the idea of us not, maintaining the exploitive power of keeping people in debt?
I think a lot of them are earnest in their fear that some of these policies, right, that are pushed by young people who are not reliable voters when it comes to elections would create a backlash from their reliable voting base. And so I do hope that, in November, we actually do have a huge turnout in young people voting, so that they can see that that there was an impact in the election by student debt cancellation as well.
Well, I mean, and it seems like the White House is kind of starting to understand that this is the time to put your foot on the gas a little bit, because the Republicans, what are they running on? Transphobia and Dr. Seuss, right? Like they're a bit on the back foot. And so I was really happy that in the House, Pelosi and you all prioritized passing legislation like codifying abortion and marriage equality. And right now, Chuck Schumer seems to be kind of trying, and the bipartisan coalition, they seem to be trying to wrangle the votes to hold a vote on marriage equality. Now, I'm a little concerned that Republicans are going to try to stall. I think you should just hold the vote right away and make someone like Ron Johnson say, take a vote on it in a tough election. What's your stance on that? I know that the House did your job there, but are you hoping that the Senate can just push this through? Because if Republicans want to vote against marriage equality in the year 2022, I want to make them take that vote.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think we should make them take the vote. But I certainly also could understand that there is an actual path for it passing, and it would mean a significant deal to so many families that are feeling uncertain right now. Certainly to a lot of the families that I just spoke with at the HRC gala in Minneapolis. This is, my family isn't threatened by any legislation that we're waiting on, and I know that there are a lot of families who are. And so if there is a path forward in trying to get it codified, I want them to be able to explore that. The new talking point for the Democrats is that we're going to put people over politics. And this is certainly one of those cases where we have to make sure that the politics of the day does not kill legislation that has the ability to become law.
I don't like the rap that politics is getting in that. Why can't we say electoral politics? Because it's all politics, right? I mean, it's regardless of those 10 Republicans who hopefully will show up after the election, as opposed to before. It's still on, for halfway at least for them a political calculation as to how they're going to vote. But I am with you in that it's sort of like a tough decision. You're having to trust that the 10 are going to show up afterwards. And I would imagine, Tammy Baldwin has had conversations that, lead her to believe that that's the best opportunity. She's spearheading that effort in the Senate to the extent that I'm aware of. And it's
and in many ways, it's hard to judge, right? Because I know that it is more personal for her than it is for me. And that's why I started that conversation with that, because for people who many of the policies that we vote on is personal, you have to trust when they tell you, I think I can get the votes. Let me try it. And I'm going to trust the senator that she does believe has the votes and wants to give her colleagues the time and the ability to come to that decision.
I have some more questions about legislation, but first I want to just ask about the nurses' strike. Minnesota saw the largest strike of private nurses, I think, in the country
ever.
In the country ever.
Yeah.
Last week. Yes. Okay. And 14 to 15,000 nurses went on strike for 3 days. Give us a sense of like where things stand with that, and what kind of support there was for the nurses there, because this feels like part of a burgeoning sort of reemergence of labor's understanding of their power.
Yeah, having 15,000 nurses go on strike, it was historic and significant. I think it does have a clear impact on the labor movement. Right now, that power was recognized by executives in the healthcare industry in Minnesota. So they are re-entering negotiations. I hope that they carry out those negotiations in good faith and that nurses get what they are owed. These are people who, without them, the healthcare system wouldn't work. Without them, patients wouldn't get the care that they need. And without them, I don't know where many of us would be when we show up to seek care. And so the level of support from all levels of power in Minnesota was tremendous. We had myself, the governor, almost every single person, on the Democrat side, obviously, who holds office, come out on the picket line with them. As someone who's been part of a union who went on strike few times, I don't remember us receiving that level of significant of support. And so I know it made the nurses feel really good that every single person was out there supporting them.
What's the sense in the general population? Because, I mean, it's a slightly different dynamic. But I just remember maybe we had a subway strike here, or a bus strike. When was it? Like maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago? I can't remember now. And there was animosity. I mean, at least I don't know what the polling.
Yeah,
would say,
I'm
just curious as to like what's your sense of like what the general population, how are they reacting to a strike like that? I guess it was in 2005. I'm old, so I thought it was like 8 years ago. It was actually 17 years ago. Oh God! But anyways,
I feel that way too. The last two times I personally worked in a unionized workplace where we striked was 2008 and 2009. I always say, a couple years ago, but it's not. It feels that way. But oftentimes, as you are aware of, Sam, when folks go on strike, there is an ask to the public not to cross the picket line, right? And to help with that movement. But in this case, because they are striking a healthcare facility,
right.
They were asking for people to continue to seek care. And so the public were in full support. I don't think I've heard in the news or just talking to people, any sort of pushback from the public. People understood why it was important for nurses to have a decent schedule, staffing level that is sustainable for them to be paid well. These are people that we've hailed as heroes and said they were essential workers. And it's not okay for us to just, fly a balloon that says celebrate our heroes. We have to give them a hero's pay and make sure that they are getting a hero's dignified workplace.
Turning back to legislation, I don't know how many signatories there are now, but there are at least, I guess, 45, 50 signatories on a letter written by your colleague Raul Gravala about the Joe Manchin side deal. This is the permitting deal that he made with Chuck Schumer. They're trying to put it into the continuing resolution. Like, where does that stand now? And really, like, at what point, like, how much, and I imagine this is going to come from the Progressive Caucus, how much of a will is there to sink the continuing resolution in the event that it is stuck into the continuing resolution?
Yeah, Chairman Grijalva is, as you know, a former chair of the Progressive Caucus. There's a conversation that is continuing to be had with leadership in the House and the Senate to try to make sure that we get a clean CR. Keeping the government functioning and open is definitely something I think everybody wants to see. And there is no reason for there to be a CR that faces the threat of not passing that would ultimately lead to a government shutdown. And again, if we were to be political, we're 50 days from the election in November, in a midterm year where we are desperately trying to keep the House and the Senate and continue to pass legislation that will be impactful in people's lives. This is not the time to take that risk. And so I know that many of us who are signatories of that letter have made that clear, and our hope is that leadership listens.
Well, I mean, Manchin has burned you guys on your side before in the midst of the negotiations on Build Back Better, which he essentially killed, and the Inflation Reduction Act is the shadow of that. But is there a desire on your guys' part in the CPC to essentially say, hey, you broke your promise on the Senate end. We're not going to cave to this because this is an agreement that Schumer and Manchin made behind closed doors. You did not agree to this. So attaching a pipeline piece of legislation to the continuing resolution to keep the government funded, that you guys had no part of that. So in my opinion, you're under no obligation to agree to it.
Yeah, and I think that is what the letter makes it clear to leadership, and I think it's important to also understand, right? This is not a funding bill that would have policies for the future. This is literally seeing the government shut down. And so this is significant. I think it's imperative for leadership to understand what they're putting at risk at this moment.
All right. So obviously, like this is a sort of as silent of a negotiation as can be because of those political constraints. But and maybe it's easier to talk about hypothetically, in a situation like this, what's going on in terms of like there's clearly there is a cohort in the House that is saying to Pelosi, we don't want this in the continuing resolution. Schumer is telling Pelosi, we need this. I would imagine part of the calculation is if Joe Manchin is so vital after November 8th, chances are the House is lost anyways, right? And if Joe Manchin is less vital because maybe there's been 2 pickups in the Senate, that's more likely than the House has a better chance of being held, right? I mean, are these part of the calculations that people are making in terms of like, how much are we going to kowtow to Joe Manchin here? And, on one hand, on the other hand, how much are we not going to shoot ourselves in the foot because we want to win the House and the shutting down of government just gives us bad press for a week, 4 weeks out from the election. And how much somewhere in between there does it become like, just give him his pipeline in West Virginia. give him his pipeline that he so desperately wants, make it seem like it's a policy, but it's basically just a giveaway so that he can be paid off because that's the way that this guy operates. My words, not yours. I mean, how much, what goes on in a more hypothetical situation in this, a situation that looks very much like this, hypothetically speaking?
I mean, hypothetically speaking, right. there are deals that constantly have to be made in order for pieces of legislation to be passed when you have the sort of slim majorities that we have. And I think part of this calculation is sort of also thinking about, you know, what happens with Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate. Do they have the numbers to pass a CR that you know allows for this deal to be made for Manchin, and how much of a significant negotiation could be done with Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate. And so I know that leadership has to hold a lot, and there's a lot that the Progressive Caucus has to think about. There's a lot of levers, and you know, time will tell where things end up being. And I do just want to say, you know, when you are thinking about a CR, which is a continuing resolution for those that are listening, because we haven't had the ability to pass an actual budget in Congress for a really long time. So we do these continuing resolutions, right, that say government should be funded the way that it was funded last time, which has been the case for a long time now. That's people's paychecks. That's, you know, a lot of the essential needs that people need. It's Social Security and everything else that goes along with it. And so there's a lot to think about when you're thinking about a government shutdown. Even if it's shut down for 2-3 days, what are you coming back to negotiate is also something that we have to think about. Outside of the politics of what it means in November, we also have to think about what it means for people's lives. And I think that in many ways, a lot of us want to make sure that there is no disruption in people's lives as much as possible.
A tangential issue to this is the leadership. Like I say, I'm old. I remembered the transit strike in 2005, and I thought it was in 2012. But I also remember the last time that Nancy Pelosi was looking for votes for leadership, she made a vow that she would not seek leadership after this term of the House. What is there any word on, like, has she forgotten that vow? Do you know if is there talk? I mean, do questions like this continuing resolution thing come into it? I mean, are those part of the negotiations? I mean, where does that stand? Hypothetically,
those are not part of negotiations for a CR and keeping the government open. Right. Thankfully, I don't really know because again, right, most of us are concerned about whether we keep the House or not, and you know what ultimately happens will allow for us to have that conversation. I can't say that I've heard a single conversation where the speaker is seeking another term as speaker or minority leader, God forbid. And so my assumption at the moment is that promise is probably still being kept.
Well, hypothetically, again, does someone in the Congressional Progressive Caucus have designs on maybe making a run for the speakership in the event that, hypothetically, someone named Hakeem Jeffries is being lined up as the person who's going to take over for Nancy Pelosi? Again, we're just asking hypotheticals.
Hypothetically. Between now and November, I have, I think, multiple schedules with folks that are seeking those positions. So hypothetically, there's a lot of people being considered within the Progressive Caucus for positions of leadership.
And lastly, I guess let's just turn to the fall. Like, what is have you had a have you noticed a change in terms of like on the ground? And obviously, your district is pretty blue, but have you noticed any type of change over the course of this year in terms of like where you have become more optimistic about the chances to hold the House?
Yes. We have more seats that are Democratic toss-up than we did, say, June. Right now in the polls. In Minnesota, a lot of our the seats that we would be worried about are doing better. In the polls, there's a lot more conversations about what the overturning of Roe means and how much it's activating people to get involved. Yesterday, I was out door knocking the University of Minnesota, and almost every single student I talked to said they weren't planning on voting and registering, but they are registered now and they're voting, and their number one issue is abortion. Wow. And so, for a lot of people that sort of don't think about midterms, a lot of people that move to a new neighborhood or a new state or a city that, don't want to take the time to do this, they are certainly motivated. And I think that there's a positive shift for Democrats this year. Former President Bill Clinton said something about, Republicans closed strong, and we shouldn't take their record of closing strong and finding some weird thing to fearmonger around for granted. And I think that message is clearly being heard, and Democrats are ready, I think, to counter a lot of the fear-mongering that Republicans do towards the election day.
All right, and this is the last question, I promise. Is there any talk about the DCCC chair? A lot of people are very critical of Sean Maloney for essentially abandoning his existing district and coming in and bigfooting Mondaire Jones in his district. The net is the loss of a progressive congressperson in the House. Is there concern amongst your colleagues? I mean, this guy's supposed to be building helping Democrats, as opposed to sort of using his authority to sort of squeeze some out.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of conversations. A lot of people have been openly critical. And I'll just say my computer is about to go to sleep. There's like 5% left. Sorry, I didn't come prepared. I know many people can relate to this. But there's a lot of conversations. And again, as I said, our calendars are filled with people who are seeking to hold different leadership positions. And there's just a lot of movement in the Democratic caucus right now in trying to see how we can shake up the leadership positions that exist and have new voices and new blood in there.
Representative Ilhan Omar, Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. All right, folks. We're going to head into the fun half of the program. Not that that wasn't fun.
Very fun.
It's a muscle flexing half.
A lot of hypothetical.
Really good show today.
It was a good show today.
Woo.
We got into hypotheticals and a lot of thought experiments. I mean, I think, it is the implications of a government shutdown. I think, for some people, it can just read like, oh, government shutdown, just words in a paper, in the newspaper or on the internets. But it also, I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that.
Those are the limits of, of flexing your muscle, right? And trying to secure things like no pipeline being built through West Virginia, then it bumps up against people's actual lives being immediately impacted.
Yep.